Okay, welcome back everybody to a new series of Tanya in which we've reached what can be described as the heart of Tanya. We're in the depth of it. Even if you haven't been with us all the way, this series is a self-contained one, and yet it really expresses some of the deepest ideas of Tanya right in the center. This series we've entitled Happiness and Depression, How to Turn on the Joy and Beat Feeling Down. And when somebody saw me advertise this series, they said to me, don't tell me that you're going to be teaching Tanya as a replacement for therapy, that people don't need to go to a therapist, they just have to study Tanya and they'll be fine. Is that what you're trying to do? And I said, of course not. That's not at all what I'm doing. Studying Tanya and going to therapy are two separate things. They can complement each other. Sometimes one's more necessary than the other one, but they're not mutually exclusive, certainly not the case. However, certainly studying Tanya will help anybody in trying to, first of all, understand our own emotions, and then to manage them, to direct them, and to lift ourselves up. There's no question of that. The Tanya is good for that, good for everybody. The happiness that we're talking about here is a happiness that is attainable for anyone, no matter what their life circumstances, no matter what their experiences, no matter who they are. The depression that we're discussing here also is the type of depression that every single person does experience on some level, and is manageable through some of the techniques that Tanya offers. We're not here talking about somebody who is in a state of deep clinical depression, in which case they need a major intervention. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the everyday type of depression that each one of us experience, whether it's a daily, weekly, monthly, or yearly basis, but we all go through it at certain times, and we can all work on it through these techniques. This is what this part of Tanya is going to talk about. To give a very quick overview of how we got here in Tanya, the first 25 chapters of Tanya that lead us to the 26th chapter we're going to study this evening. The first 8 chapters of Tanya tell us, in a nutshell, about our soul. The makeup of our soul is that we have 2 souls. We have a divine soul and we have an animal soul. The divine soul, our drive to do good, our altruistic self, and our animal soul is our selfish, instinctive self that can lead to all types of evil as well. These 2 souls inhabit the one body, and the first 8 chapters describe in depth how they work. From then on, from chapter 9 until chapter 17, it talks about the wrestle, the fight between these 2 souls, and various different levels that a person can reach in controlling their animalistic self and allowing their divine self to come out. And the emphasis of those chapters is that what's expected of us is to become what's called a Beinoni. A Beinoni means a struggler, somebody who has a very healthy animal soul, who has all types of ugly appetites, but controls them, holds them down. We have our animal soul, we have an evil inclination, but we don't let it control our lives, we control it. That is what's expected of all of us. To totally rid yourself of animalistic desires, that's a saint, that's a tzaddik, that's a very rare type of person. The rest of us are here to not overcome our animalistic drives, but to control them, to be able to do the right thing, even though we don't always feel like doing the right thing. And then, from chapter 18 until 25, Tanya went through the various amazing powers that we have in our soul that we don't even realize. The strength that we have, the determination, the deep desire to connect to God and do the right thing that every one of us have in our soul, and it's just a matter of awakening it, tapping into it, allowing it to come to the fore, and then we can be victorious in this battle. It is a realistic battle. To say that a person should be able to control themselves and do the right thing every single day of our life is realistic. It's possible. But you need to know what you've got inside you. You need to know the powers you've got inside you. That's the first 25 chapters of Tanya on one foot. In the 26th chapter, Rabbi Zalman enters into a new section, a new level in describing the battle that we have with our inner souls and inner struggle. He goes into the centrality of joy and happiness in this battle, and the major threat that depression and melancholy pose to us being a good person. That's this next section that we're going to delve into starting this evening. Chapter 26 will give us some strategies for happy living and also knowing when to be sad. Tanya makes it clear that sadness is not always bad. There is a time and a place for being sad, there is an appropriate use for it, but you have to be the one in control to decide when that is. That we're going to see this evening in chapter 26. Before we get into it, let's just have a little quick discussion. What exactly is happiness? We're not trying to define what happiness is, but what place does happiness have in our lives? Do we see happiness as being a gift? Is happiness a goal? Is happiness a duty? Or is happiness a dream? Now we could say all of the above, but if we would put them into order, into 1, 2, 3, and 4. Happiness is primarily what? Primarily a gift, a goal, a duty, a dream. Is it then also, which one? What would be third on the pecking order? And what's the lowest of the 4 of these? If you have a brief moment to think about it, what is happiness first and foremost? A gift, a goal, a duty, or a dream? A dream?
Goal.
A goal?
Duty.
A gift.
A duty? A gift? Okay, we've got all 4. That's good. It's good we don't agree. That's a good crowd. Okay, well, let's argue each one. Why would happiness be a gift? What does it mean that happiness is a gift? What does that imply? What does that say about happiness if it's a gift?
That we're lucky to have it.
Lucky to have it. A gift is something that you didn't earn, you didn't create yourself, it was bestowed upon you. You're passive in receiving a gift, and so therefore if you've got it, you're lucky you've got it. If you don't, then you're unlucky that you don't have it. And what can you do about not having happiness if happiness is a gift? Not much. I mean, if someone didn't give me a gift, they didn't give it to me. If I don't have it, I don't have it.
Give it to yourself.
You can ask, but then it's not much of a gift.
Give it to yourself.
Sorry?
Give it to yourself.
Give it to yourself. Okay. So how do you give it to yourself if you don't have it?
That, a whole lot of things. You've got to do a lot of things to give it to yourself.
Okay, but then is it a gift? Is it a gift if you're giving it to yourself? If you're doing stuff for it, is that a gift?
And it's a goal.
A goal. So what would it mean that happiness is a goal? Something to strive for. A goal means that this is what I'm heading for. Happiness is what I want. The pursuit of happiness. Trying to get to happiness, trying to reach it. Which means, a goal means I make my goals and I aim for them and I put effort to reach those goals. Unlike a gift that comes to me, a goal is something I go to. I'm going towards it. I'm trying to reach happiness. Okay? And what would it mean that happiness is a duty? Somebody said that.
Hashem wants us to be happy, so it's a duty to God to be there to fulfill that.
Okay? That God wants us to be happy. It's a mitzvah to be happy. And so therefore you're obligated. It's a duty. It's something you need to do. Which means if you're not happy,
Sin. You're not happy.
you're doing the wrong thing. You're not fulfilling your duty by being happy. You have to be happy. So what does that say about happiness? A gift, we said, well, if you got it, you got it. If you don't, you don't. You can't do anything about it. A goal means it's something you're striving towards, trying to get to. If it's a duty, what's the difference between a duty and a goal?
You have to fulfill a duty. It's something
you must do,
We're-
regardless of, I mean, obviously, it's something that you have to do. There's no real, I do or don't want to do it. It's something that's just...
Right. Whereas a goal is something you set for yourself,
You decide on the
self-directed.
As opposed to an obligation, moral obligation.
Moral obligation means it's an obligation that's put on you from the outside.
Yeah,
It's
and
an
from
expectation
society.
of you from a higher being, whereas a goal is not necessarily. It could be something you've made for yourself. Also, if happiness is a goal, that means it's the end. It's where you're trying to get to. What happens along the way? Where are you while you're trying to reach happiness? You're not there yet. You're not happy yet. You're happy when you get to the goal. You're not happy until you get there. Whereas if happiness is a duty, so when does happiness have to be? Now. Right now. It's your duty not to get there, to be it, to live it, to be happy. What about a dream? What does it mean that happiness is a dream?
It's beyond you.
Beyond.
You don't get it.
Dream.
something you decide, something you want.
Yeah. It's something you want. How's that different to a goal?
Dream.
Not necessarily obtainable.
But a dream is a bit elusive. It's maybe we'll get there, if only. Or in the Hebrew, halavai, if only we could be happy. Wouldn't that be great? It's a dream that we hope for ourselves, but not necessarily can we get there. So you could argue any of these and all of the above, and we've all given very good support for saying happiness is a gift that is bestowed upon some people. Some people have it, some people don't. And it's not really so much up to you. There's definitely base to say that. To say that happiness is a goal, something to strive for, something to reach towards, yeah, absolutely. To say it's a duty, an obligation, something that is expected of us, yes. And to say it's a dream, that happiness is a dream that we would love to have, but we don't know if we're going to get it. Also, all these are true. However, we're going to find, very interestingly, that in Tanya, Rabbi Shneur Zalman chooses one of these definitions or these descriptions of happiness and focuses on it primarily. And that is that happiness is a duty, that it's a moral obligation to be happy, that it says in the book of Psalms, Ivdu es Hashem b'simcha, you should serve God with joy. You're being told to serve God with joy, meaning this is an expectation of you. You're being asked to be happy. It's a commandment, a duty, an obligation, which probably out of all four of these, that one is the most almost counterintuitive, at least in our thinking today, that happiness is a duty. The word duty and the word happiness don't usually go together. The implication today in our very free type of world of a duty is something that's heavy, something that holds you down, something that you've got to do. Happiness, in our thinking, in our modern thinking, is freedom, is doing whatever I want, is having my needs fulfilled, having my desires fulfilled, not fulfilling somebody else's desire, which is a duty, but having my desires fulfilled, which is my pleasure, fun. Rabbi Shneur Zalman doesn't understand it that way, and he sees happiness as being a duty, an obligation, and he'll explain why. He'll explain why that we are obligated to be happy, which also implies happiness is within our reach, because God cannot give us an obligation that we cannot fulfill. God does not expect something from us that is not within our reach. He doesn't demand from us something that we can't do. So if there's an obligation to be happy, it means happiness is within our reach. It's up to us. It isn't in our control. It's not based on external circumstances or things that have happened to us. It is something that we determine and we choose. Happiness is a choice, and we are expected to make that choice. Rabbi Shneur Zalman is going to explain why at the beginning of chapter 26. Let's delve into it. He starts the chapter with a very strong statement. Everyone needs to know this cardinal principle. The following thing everyone needs to know, so let's know it. When two individuals are wrestling with each other, each striving to overcome the other, if one is lazy and sluggish, he will easily be defeated and overcome, even though he be stronger than the other. Exactly so it is in the conquest of one's evil nature. It is impossible to conquer it with laziness and heaviness, which originate from sadness and a heart that is numb like a stone, but rather with enthusiasm which comes from joy and a heart free of any trace of worry and sadness in the world. Using a metaphor, a physical metaphor of a wrestle, you have two opponents wrestling each other. You could have one of them that is much stronger than the other. And so if you would weigh their strength, if you would just look at them from an external perspective, who's going to win? It's obvious. One of them is much more strong, much more powerful than the other. However, says Rabbi Shneur Zalman, in the art of wrestling, there are many factors that determine the winner. Strength is not the only determining factor. In fact, it's not always the most determining factor. Alacrity, confidence, enthusiasm, agility, a drive to win, they will be just as much determiners of the victory as strength, and sometimes even more. You can have one party who is physically stronger, much bigger, and should win, but they don't win because they're lazy, they're sluggish, they're slow. Whereas the other opponent who physically is actually weaker, but because they have a certain confidence, they move with an agility that actually allows them to defeat a stronger opponent. In many martial arts, you could use the other person's strength against them. If you're quick enough, if you're smart enough, if you're confident enough, you can actually defeat a stronger opponent. And so if this is true of physical wrestling, we know that the physical world is merely an expression of spiritual truth. Everything in this world, in the physical world, is a metaphor for spiritual reality. So if in physical wrestling, strength is not the determining factor, but agility, enthusiasm, and confidence are, so in our spiritual wrestle that we have within ourselves of the two souls, our divine good soul and our animalistic negative soul, in that wrestle, that internal wrestle and battle, the winner will not necessarily be the stronger one. It will be the one that is confident, that is joyous. When you are battling against your inner evil, if you're lazy and slow, you will lose. If you are agile, joyous, confident, upbeat, then you will win. Even though your animal might be quite strong, maybe stronger than your divine side as far as how you've developed it. Maybe your animal soul has had many years of experience and your divine soul hasn't been worked on all that much. Maybe you have followed a path that has encouraged the animalistic side and your divine soul is yet to be developed. So it's weaker. It's out of practice. It's untrained. But if you have joy, you're much more likely to win the battle. Without joy, you're very unlikely to win the battle. Look, going back to the words that Rabbi Shneur Zalman used, he gave us a very interesting and clear idea of what he's talking about here. That laziness and heaviness originate from sadness and a heart that is numb like stone. That what causes us to feel that heaviness, that slowness of movement, it's an emotional thing. That our lack of drive is because we feel emotionally heavy. So our limbs don't move. It's hard, everything is difficult, everything is a burden, everything is a schlep, is an inconvenience, is too much effort. When we're in that down state, when emotionally we're feeling down, so then physically we are sluggish, we're slow, everything's too hard. And any opponent, any opposition, any obstacle is just too much to overcome. We just can't do it. Whereas when we, the same person, with the same obstacles and the same strength, but when we are upbeat, when we're positive, so then suddenly these blockages fall away. Suddenly things that were obstacles just are not obstacles. Things that are issues are just not issues anymore. Everything just flows and things go smoothly. It's not that our strength changed, it's merely that our level of joy changes. When we're joyous, when we're happy, when we're upbeat, we can overcome stuff. When we're down, we can't. When we're talking here about the inner battle, the moral battle of being a good person against our negative side that tries to drag us down, so this joy takes on a whole different meaning. This is not happiness, like the pursuit of happiness. This is a moral obligation. To be a good person, you need to be joyous. To live a good moral life, to make the right choices, to do good, you need to be joyous. Because if you're not, your evil, animalistic, selfish side is going to win every time. So joy becomes a moral obligation, not a luxury or a nice ideal. It's your obligation. To be a good person, you need to be joyous because you've got a battle to be a good person. See, again, this is all based on the first chapters of Tanya. When we understand the idea of the two souls that we have, that we've got a beautiful, pristine, holy soul, and we've got this ugly, selfish, instinctive soul, and they're both battling for our lives, for control of our day-to-day life. When we understand that battle that's going on inside of us, so then we can understand what he's saying here, that joy is necessary for being a good person. Because we're not just a static being. We're not just like, am I a good person or not such a good person? You're both. You've got amazing goodness, and you've got some ugly negativity as well. And it's both you. It's not somebody else down the road, it's you, and they're both inside you. And only one of those yous is going to be in control, is going to dominate at any one time. There is a battle going on. And when there's a battle going on, the winner is not the strong one, the winner is the confident one, the one who is more upbeat, who is more determined to win, who has joy. So he explains here, in these very few words, contain some very profound ideas. First of all, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, he gives us a very important definition of sadness and what sadness is that we're talking about here. Usually, when we think of sadness, we think of an emotion. The emotion of being sad, of feeling down, of feeling sad about something that has happened to us or something that we have done. We feel bad and down and melancholy. But here Rabbi Shneur Zalman says, sadness comes from a heart that is numb like stone. The sadness that we're talking about here is a sadness where your heart is numb, is not feeling, is switched off, has become like a rock, like a stone, has become inanimate. And he's going to elaborate this in ensuing chapters, that sadness that we're talking about here, the negative form of sadness, is actually not a feeling. It's non-feeling. That's why it's so bad. Sadness that is a feeling is not so bad. In the right place at the right time, it can be very good. But the non-feeling sadness, numbness, where you just feel nothing, that's bad news. That's bad news, and that is what we're talking about here. That causes you to be stone-like entirely, to become lazy, heavy, and you can't move. If you're feeling something, that's already good news. We can work with that. If you're feeling a sadness, that's something. When you're feeling nothing, when you're numb, that's bad news. And that's what we're talking about here. So, if you're able to cry about something, that means you're alive. If you can't even cry about it because you feel nothing, then your heart is frozen. And that needs serious work. That something has to give. Being sad about it is good. Having no feeling is bad news. This is the sadness we're talking about here. And therefore the flip side of that is, what is joy? Joy comes from a heart that is free of any trace of worry and sadness in the world. Interestingly, sadness comes from a heart that is numb. Joy comes from a heart free of any trace of worry or sadness, which means that to be sad, something has to have happened to you, to your heart. Your heart has to have frozen up due to either experiences or your own thoughts, whatever it is, you've frozen up your heart. Something has happened to your heart to make you sad. To be happy, what do you need? You don't need something. You need not to have worries and sadness in your heart. As long as you're free of those, then your heart's natural state will be a joyous state because it's alive. This doesn't mean that you're not crying. You might be crying about something, but that's being alive. That's a form of joy. Feeling is a form of joy. Non-feeling is sadness. Rabbi Shneur Zalman in these few lines has completely shifted our whole definition of joy and sadness to a much more profound understanding. If you're living life reacting to things around you, you're alive, that's good news. Some of the things will be good, some things will be bad, but your heart is beating, you're feeling, you're reacting, you're there. That's good, that's alive. If you're not reacting, if you've gone numb, you can't cry about things that should make you cry. You can't laugh at things that should make you laugh. You're not feeling love towards those people who you should love. So that's a heart of stone, that's bad news, that's called sadness. And that's what has to be avoided at all costs. Falling into that state where we're not feeling anymore, that is bad news. To be joyous, you just have to make sure that there's no worry or sadness in your heart. If your heart is beating, if it's working, if it's functioning, then that is joy. You're already in a state of joy. Then we can start talking about what's happening in your life. Are there good things happening or bad things happening? And that in the rest of the chapter he's going to discuss. So now your heart is beating. So what if I go through this? What if I go through that? Okay, we'll talk about that soon. But the number one thing is that you're alive, that your heart is alive, is open. If your heart is open, it is joyous. If it's closing up, even partially, that's the beginning of sadness, and that's what needs to be dealt with. That is a worry. And when you're in that state, you cannot win your battle. You can't win your battle against your animal self. And so what's going to happen? It's going to trample all over you. Your animal self will take full control when you're feeling down, and you'll become animalistic, instinctive, and selfish. It's interesting that the state of being in a state of sadness, this heaviness, this numbness of heart, is actually a very self-absorbed state. It's where you're thinking a lot about yourself. You're wallowing in your own misery. You're feeling down and about yourself, thinking that you're the lowest in the world, and no one's got it as bad as you. But meanwhile, you're indulging in that thinking about self. And that is the animal soul. That's exactly what the animal soul wants. Just be selfish. Just think of self. Don't think of anything outside of yourself. That's because once you're in that state, so then all of a sudden everything's permissible. Every desire can be fed because it's just me. It's just about my comfort. If I need to trample over another person, I'm not even aware of another person. I'm just totally self-absorbed. And so other people don't even have a real existence for me. This is what the animal soul wants, us to be totally selfish. The opposite of our divine soul, which is totally selfless, altruistic, wants truth, wants goodness, wants to give. So it's the desire of our animal soul to drag us into this self-pity, which is self-absorbed, which is a numbness of heart where we feel nothing for anybody else, we don't have any care, and that will lead us to every evil in the world. It's when we're in that state that we can do the most damage to ourselves and to others. We can totally make a mess of ourselves. Whereas when we're in that joyous state where the heart is feeling, then we're more likely to do good because we can conquer our animal soul, our animal drives. So this is the first thought that Rabbi Shneur Zalman offers on the battle of sadness, against sadness and the effort to engage ourselves with joy. It is a duty. It is an obligation. Just like it's an obligation to be a good person, it's an obligation to be a happy person, because a happy person will be more likely a good person. A sad, miserable person will more likely do bad things. Therefore, it's a duty, it's an obligation. Now, that's all very well, but the obvious question is, what if I'm not happy? And I've got reason not to be happy. It's nice to tell me I've got a duty to be happy, but what if I'm not happy? And I can list you the reasons why I'm not happy. So those reasons aren't just going to go away because I decide I have to be happy. If there are things that are making me sad, the things that are bringing me down, and those things are real, they're reasonable, they're worthy of being sad about, so then how can I not be sad? We're not going to talk about unrealistic or made-up reasons to be sad. We're not talking about a person who's sad because they want a better car than the neighbor. That's just being silly. We're talking about real reasons to be sad. What are the real reasons to be sad? Rabbi Shneur Zalman identifies two major sources of sadness. The two main sources of sadness that are reasonable, fair reasons to be sad. What are they? What are the sources of sadness? Reasonable ones?
Death or loss.
A death or a loss? Yep. Absolutely. And that could be expanded to being not just somebody dying, but it could be the loss of a relationship, and the end of a relationship, the loss of a job. Sorry?
Someone's life. A family member.
Yeah.
Losing someone.
Yeah, for sure. But by extension, not just losing them physically, an actual death, but a relationship that falls apart. That's upsetting, that's sad. That's a fair reason to be sad. What other causes of sadness? A valid cause of sadness? Failure? In?
Anything. I suppose losing a job is, similar to the first one.
Yep. So losing a job could, on the one hand, it's you're losing your livelihood. I need to make a living. I don't have a job. So that's a cause for anxiety and sadness. Also, there is the ego side of losing a job, that failure, that I wasn't good enough, that I've been rejected, that feeling of rejectedness. Certainly, that's a reason to be sad.
So hurting someone or letting someone down, accidentally or not meaning to, or...
Right. So here, it's not something that happened to you, it's something that you've done, but you let somebody else down or you hurt somebody, and so you feel sad. Why are you sad about that?
Because you've caused someone pain, especially if you didn't mean to do it. I think that's the worst kind of
Mhm.
Sadness is when you're unaware that you have caused someone hurt.
Right. So is the sadness because they are in pain?
You've done it to them.
And that you've done it, that you've been the cause of pain. So the sadness there is that your own moral failing, that I did not do the right thing, and by doing the wrong thing or not doing the right thing, I've hurt somebody else, I've let somebody else down, I've caused pain to another. So there's the fact that they're in pain, there's also my own imperfection, that I didn't do the right thing, there's something wrong in me. So we've so far identified two possible sources of sadness, one internal, one external. There's something that happens to us that makes us sad, a loss or a failure, or there's the failure that we've caused. The fact that I've failed, there's an internal disappointment in myself that causes me sadness. I'm sad because I have done the wrong thing. I look at myself and I feel that I'm not the person I should be. That I haven't lived up to the expectations of me. I'm not a good person. I've got traits that are ugly, that are inappropriate. I have thoughts that come to my mind that shouldn't come to my mind. I do things that I regret later. These things cause us great sadness. In judging ourselves, in looking at our own self, we can sometimes feel disappointment, valid disappointment, and sadness in our state. I feel bad about myself. So these indeed are the two major sources: hardships that come to us and being hard on ourselves, the things that we are not perfect about, that our own imperfections. These are the two major valid sources of sadness in our life. So to say that we have a duty to be happy, how am I supposed to be happy when I've suffered a major loss? How am I supposed to be happy when I know how rotten I am? How can I be happy with these things going on to me or within me? How can I just be happy? You can't just come along and tell me you have a duty, an obligation, a mitzvah, it's a commandment to be happy. Thou shalt be happy. But I'm not, and I've got good reason not to be. So how am I supposed to overcome that? So here Rabbi Shneur Zalman is going to go through each of these two forms of unhappiness or sources of unhappiness and explain why neither of them need to lead to sadness. Even though both of them are valid, they're difficult, and they're real. And as we said, if you're a living person, if your heart is beating, you're affected by what goes on around you. So how can you not let that make you sad? If you think about it, if your heart is numb, then these things don't affect you. But that is what sadness is, when you're numb to these things, and so therefore it doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't matter that you're rotten to another person because you don't feel anything. Or it doesn't even matter that things are happening to you because you're so numb that you have no way of reacting and responding to it. That's no good. So we're supposed to be alive. We're supposed to have our heart beating. We're supposed to be feeling and reacting to things. But then how can you not be sad when bad things happen to you or when you've done bad? How can that not make you sad if your heart is responsive, is alive?
When you talk about sadness, are you talking about the numbness of the heart? Is that in these two major sources, these are valid sources
these are
of
things
sadness, numbness of the heart?
Well, these are things that lead to negative emotion, and that leads to numbness of the heart, or that's what becomes, our heart becomes numb. Our nature is that when we feel pain, we don't like that. And so there's a certain point where we switch off to the pain. We try to switch off to the pain, and that's where we get numb, and we're in a state of sadness. So these are the things that lead to it. How are we supposed to stop that? How are you supposed to remain alive and feeling, respond to these things realistically, and yet not be sad, not become sad and numb from it? That's the question. So, starting with hardships. Here is says Rabbi Shneur Zalman, this is from chapter 26, here is a practical technique for cleansing one's heart of all sadness and of every trace of worry about material matters, even concerning family, health, and finances. Starting with the things that happen to us. That he's offering, this is a major offer here, to cleanse one's heart of any trace of worry and sadness. It's firstly about material matters, about things that are happening to us, around us, in the physical world, And he says, even if those things are concerning family, health, and finances. In Aramaic, family, health, and finances are bona chaya mezoneh. And in Jewish tradition, these are the three basic, most important needs that we have. If we have a healthy, happy family life, if we're physically healthy in our body, and if our finances, we're making a living, we're paying the bills, they are our material needs. That's what we need in this world for happiness, in the most basic level. The extra car or the new phone, that's peripheral. That's not absolute necessity, but these things are. Family here means to have healthy relationships, to find a soulmate, to be blessed with children, to be loved by the people around you. These are basic needs that if we're lacking all of that, so then a person can't be just on their own and happy. There is a fundamental lack if a person has no relationships around them, is not a child or a parent, is not a brother or a sister, is a wife or a husband. If we don't have any of those things that are giving us meaning, so then we're lacking something essential to our well-being. Health, again, is just quite simply being healthy. If our body is not functioning well, if we're not able to get up in the morning, so then that is a basic need that is missing. And finally, finances. If we can't pay the bills, if we can't put bread on the table, then we're suffering in a very basic way. Again, we're not talking here about luxuries, we're talking here about the basic needs that we have. So, what if you're missing in one of these three, or all three? What if you don't have the ideal family life? What if your health is not the best? What if your finances, you're struggling? These are not things that we have total control over. We have some part in all three of them, but not totally. All three of them, all three of them, there are others involved. Family life is not just about me. There are others that I have to get on with. I might be very nice, but not everyone is being nice to me. That's not all up to me. My health is to a great extent not in my hands. You can eat all the right foods and do all the right exercises, but our body, things happen. And finances, certainly, that you're doing your best, working very hard, doesn't always work out. So these three things are not in our hands completely, and we may not have them all lined up perfectly, and they are very valid reasons to not be happy. However, says Rabbi Shneur Zalman, I'm going to offer a technique, a practical technique. He didn't say easy, but he said practical technique to cleanse one's heart of all sadness, all worry about these things, even these things, let alone things that are less necessary than them. What is this technique? There is a statement of the sages, a Talmudic statement that says, just as one must recite a blessing for the good, one must also recite a blessing for misfortune. In the Talmud it is explained that one should accept misfortune with joy, like the joy of a visible and obvious benefit, for this is also for the good, except that it is not apparent and visible to mortal eyes, because it stems from the hidden world which is higher than the revealed world. Let's sit on this for a little bit. So the Talmud says that one is supposed to recite a blessing for good, just like, and also a blessing for misfortune. A blessing means an expression of thanks to God, blessing God for the good that happens to us. We're also supposed to bless God for a misfortune, for a bad thing that happens to us. Now, indeed, the Talmud says there are two different blessings that we say. That a blessing on a good thing is that we bless God who is good and bestows good. And when a bad thing happens, we bless God who is the true judge. God is the true judge and decides. Sometimes bad things happen. They're different expressions of blessing, but the Talmud says we have to bless God in the same way. The wording is not the same, but our approach has to be exactly the same. That whether something good happens or something negative happens, the first thing to recognize is that it happens from God. That everything that happens is the divine plan. This is exactly how it's supposed to be. There are no mistakes, there are no accidents, nothing happens without the divine plan wanting it to happen. This is what God wants. And so therefore, when a good thing happens, we bless God, thank you for the good. When a bad thing happens, we say, we bless you, because you are the true judge to know what's right. What's fascinating about this statement is that while it's equating the good and the bad on the one hand and saying you have to bless God for both, at the same time, it's not saying that we experience them the same. It's not saying that you should be joyous that bad things are happening to you, or when pain is happening, you should celebrate that. It doesn't say that. But to bless God, to recognize that it's coming from the same place, and to bless Him the same way, meaning that we bless God enthusiastically for good. We don't begrudgingly bless Him for bad. We bless Him and we equally recognize that it's coming from the same source. Therefore, really, it's not good things and bad things happening. It's good things and hidden good things happening. It's things that are obviously good and we experience it as good. And there are things that we do not experience as good, but they are ultimately good. It's coming from the same source. Now, you can understand this on several levels. On a very simplistic level, something that we have all experienced is where something that we thought was not good turned out to be good. That, in the example given before of losing a job. So when you lose the job at the time, it's a tragedy. It's the worst thing in the world. You don't know what you're going to do. You don't know where you're going to go. This is where you've been working for so long. You had a dream that you're going to work your way up and this is your future. You had it all planned out and it fell apart. You lost the job. It was the worst thing in the world. It was a tragedy. You felt terrible. If somebody would have come up to you and said, well, you know, when good things happen, you bless God. When bad things happen, you bless God as well. And the same way. So thank God. You should bless God for losing your job. Just like you would bless God for getting a job, you should bless Him for losing a job. To that you would say, excuse me, I just lost my job. You want me to thank God for that? This is the worst thing that could happen to me. What am I supposed to do? I'm never going to find anything like that anymore. It's never going to be the same. And that's how you feel at that time. But it has happened so many times that losing of that job opened a door to another career, another direction that was so much better, that was so much more for you, that led you in a path that you didn't expect and opened up other doors, and your life went on a whole different direction that was much better than it ever would have been had you stayed in that original job. And then in retrospect, you say, oh yeah, so it was good. Me losing that job was actually good. At the time, it was good because it was the prelude for something much better. That's what it was there for. And so in retrospect, you see it. Faith means that you have to see it at the time. When it's happening, when the bad thing is happening, you say, right now, 1 second, there's only one God. The same God that gives us jobs causes us to lose jobs. It's from Him. It's not from that boss or this person or this colleague. Everything is coming from God, ultimately. And so therefore, the good things and the bad are really good, ultimately, because they're coming from Him. There must be some good that will come from it. So faith means that at the time of things bad happening, you say, this is for the good. Good is going to come from it. It's a bit easier to see that when it comes to an example like losing a job. It's a bit more difficult to see that when it comes to losing a loved one. It's a bit hard to say that a death is going to lead to something better, because a death is a finality, at least in this world, where we've lost that person. And so to say that it's going to lead to good, yes, there are certain things that come from it, that when you go through a difficult time, you become stronger, you become deeper, you become more sensitive. It could be that sometimes losing a person makes you appreciate the people that you do have. So there are good side benefits that come from a bad occurrence like that. Certainly we can say that. But not quite the same as losing this job to get a better job. You can't say this person passing away is... No, nothing replaces that. So it's a little bit more difficult to see it in that example. But you could still say that everything is for the good, ultimately is for the good, that this negative experience leads to greater things, to bigger things, to better things, and therefore we thank God for a blessing that comes into our life, and when something bad happens, we bless God as well, recognizing He's the true judge, He knows what is ultimately good. That's one way of understanding this statement of the Talmud, that we bless God for the good and also for the bad. Rabbi Shneur Zalman here has added a deeper dimension to this, a much more subtle, deeper dimension. Because the way we described it until now it's not that what's happening is good, it's that it leads to good. What you're experiencing is indeed bad, but that's only because you don't know what's coming next. Something good is coming next. So you lost this job, you're going to get a better job. Losing a job is a bad thing, but in the scheme of the big picture of the longer story, it's going to lead to something good. That's one way of looking at it, but Rabbi Shneur Zalman goes a step deeper and says that no, actually, there's something in the bad that is good. There's something about the negative experience itself that is good. And this takes a little bit more work to appreciate. He says that it's not just that the bad thing is for the good, is going to lead to good. It's that the bad thing is really good, but it is good that is not apparent or visible to mortal eyes. It's not good that you're experiencing as good because you cannot experience it as good. You are mortal, you're limited, you're finite, you're human, and so therefore you experience the bad of it. But ultimately, in truth, on a deeper level, this is a good thing that is happening. And the reason why you can't experience it as good is because it's coming from the hidden world, which is higher than the revealed world. He's referring here to a mystical, Kabbalistic concept. There's in the Aramaic language of the Zohar, Alma Disgalia and Alma Discassia, the revealed world and the hidden world, which means, on a basic level, that there is the reality that we experience, that is experienceable, that is within our reach, within our realm of experience, and then there's the reality that is beyond us. It's happening to us, we're in it, but we don't really get it, we don't really feel it, we're not really connecting to it because it's too high for us. There is goodness in the revealed world, which is goodness that we feel and taste as goodness. There is another type of goodness that comes from the hidden world, and that is too much for us to handle as goodness, so we feel it as not goodness. But that's not really what it is. It's just our perception of it. To understand it a bit better, the Hasidic masters have used metaphors that are more close to our experience, where we can get this a bit clearer. The best metaphor is an intellectual one. When you are experiencing an idea, when you are listening to a class like this one, or reading a book, or listening to a lecture, or whatever it is, in the middle of a conversation, so you have a person listening and a person talking. The person talking is giving over information, ideas, thoughts, concepts. The listener is absorbing those concepts, listening to them, understanding them, and assimilating them into their mind. As long as the discussion is on a level that the listener can relate to, you're receiving enlightenment, you're receiving information, you're getting it. As soon as the topic goes to a stage that is deeper, or built beyond the listener's experience, or in terminology that you're not used to, so there's suddenly a break between the speaker and the listener. The speaker is giving over information just like they were before, but the listener is not getting it, is not understanding it. It might be happening right now to you, that when one person's talking, you were with it for a while, and then, no, I don't know what he's talking about. That I was following, and then I'm not following anymore. It happens to us all the time. So what's going on here? From the listener's perspective, you feel a distance. You feel as if the speaker has left you behind because they're talking on a plane that you don't get. But from the speaker's perspective, no, I'm revealing to you even deeper ideas, even more powerful ideas. The fact that you're not getting it at the moment is maybe because this is new to you, or it's beyond you, it's beyond your experience. But what's actually happening is a higher form of revelation. It's just going over your head. Now, for the listener, that is little consolation. To sit in a lecture where you don't know what's going on is a very frustrating experience. It's annoying because you feel your intelligence is insulted. You feel like I don't know what's going on. I'm being condescended to. I'm being treated as if I'm stupid because I don't know what's going on. It's an alienating feeling to sit in a lecture and hear somebody talking, you don't know what they're talking about. But in actual fact, that's not the intent. And that's not really what's going on. Because when you sit and hear ideas that you don't understand at the moment, you don't get them right now, you're still basking in wisdom at that time. You're still being surrounded by ideas. And while your conscious mind is not getting it, but on some soul level, you're experiencing something. And if you're stuck in your mind and your interpretation and perception of things, it's frustrating. But if you recognize that your mind is not the confines of the universe, there's more than that. And there's something amazing going on here, even though I don't quite get what it is. So then you can experience that as not an intellectually stimulating and satisfying experience, but as a spiritual experience. That there's something big happening. There are big ideas. And maybe by listening to them now, they'll be planted in my mind, and one day it'll make sense. One day it might sink in. But I've heard it. I was there. I took part. I participated in that event, even though it didn't actually sink in. In a similar way, when good things happen, what is happening there? A divine light is coming down into the world, a divine blessing that is palatable, that is digestible, that we can handle, that is on our level. A blessing that we can experience as blessing, a light that we can experience as light, goodness that tastes like goodness. When a negative experience happens to us, when something bad happens to us, it's also coming from God. But it's coming from a place higher than the good experience, so we don't actually experience it as good. It's a bit beyond us. It's too removed from our reality to experience as good. And so therefore we experience it as bad. But not because it is bad, but because it's removed from us. That is little consolation to us down here in this world, because we're feeling it as bad. That's what bad is in this world. Bad is however you describe it, whatever you define it. That's what bad is. That's true. But if you come to an appreciation of this definition of bad, that bad is a light that is too high for us to experience, but it's really light, it's really goodness, then you will have a different attitude. You'll experience the badness differently. Now, again, it's easy to talk about a lecture that you don't understand. It's a little bit more difficult to take this down into a painful experience that you have in this world, a loss, a death, real pain and suffering. So to say this is really good, that sounds horrible. To say it's really good, it's not, it's bad. You're right, it's bad. The definition of bad is that's what bad is in this world. However, what this idea offers you is a new way of experiencing the bad, where it will still hurt, it will still be painful, you will still react to it with the appropriate feelings of loss, of grief, but there'll be a certain edge taken off that pain. It will not lead to the sadness that we described earlier, the numbness of heart, where you break off, where you close down, where you shut down your emotions. Because there's two different experiences of pain and suffering. There is the pain and suffering of it. It hurts, and that means you're alive. It hurts you because you're alive, because your heart is beating, you're aware, you're alert, and therefore it hurts. That is fine. But there's the second stage of pain and suffering, and that is the feeling of rejection, the feeling that you're being pushed away, the bitterness, the anger, the isolation that you feel as a result of feeling pain, the desire to protect yourself from pain and therefore numb your heart to not have it because you feel that it's a personal attack against you, that someone's out to get you. It's that side of pain and suffering that we have to avoid, we have to overcome. And that can be avoided with this meditation. The meditation that what's going on now is not a rejection of me. I'm not being picked on. It is actually a higher light, a higher experience that is too much for me to handle in my current state. There is a higher light that is happening here that's beyond me. but I'm not being pushed away. Now, as I said, Rabbi Shneur Zalman introduced this as being a practical strategy. He didn't say it's an easy strategy. This takes a certain depth of perception. It takes a reordering of our mind in a way, and how to view an experience of pain. And again, this is in no way to deny the pain of it. It is painful. We are humans and we suffer pain, and that is normal. But it takes the edge off that pain. It takes the anger away, the sadness, and that will avoid you becoming numb. He speaks a few more words. That what we're describing here, this is the joy of desiring the nearness of God more than anything in this world. As is written, because your loving kindness is better than life. And the nearness of God is infinitely stronger and more sublime in the hidden world, for the Most High abides in secrecy. When you reach a level where your life is not just about life is about being connected to truth, to real life, which is God. Then, when you go through good times, that is when you're somewhat distant from God. When you're going through difficult times, that is closeness to God. So close, you can't handle it, you can't experience it as goodness, so it comes out as negative. But if your criteria of goodness is closeness to God, if, like it says in the Psalms, because your loving kindness is better than life, being close to God, having a relationship with God is better than life, if being close to God is better than life, so then when you're close to Him, and therefore you feel concealment, you feel His hiddenness, then that is good. It's not pleasant for your physical self, it's not easy, but it is a closeness to God. Because the Most High abides in secrecy. God abides in secrecy, meaning that God is not a being that can be easily revealed. If He's revealed, it's not really Him. He is in hiddenness, in secrecy, not in revelation. He's in absence much more than in presence. A presence of God is only a ray of Him. His absence is His self, is His real self. If you want to really connect to infinity, it's going to be beyond you because you're finite. A finite experience you can handle, an infinite experience you can't. This is the very profound experience that we have all had of a closeness to God that comes through difficulty, through challenge, through darkness, through pain. It is actually there. Now, one has to be very careful with these ideas. You cannot speak to somebody in the midst of pain and suffering and introduce this to them. Say, like, I know you're going through grief at the moment. I just want to tell you that that's fantastic news because God is really close to you. And all this horrible stuff that's going on is actually good, but it's hidden good because, hiddenness is higher than revelation. Good is what you can handle, but bad is goodness that you can't handle. No, that was a bad idea. You can't talk to somebody who's in the midst of emotional suffering in that way. And it's not true to their experience now, because emotion feels what I'm feeling now. And you need to feel sorrow. I mean, Jewish law does dictate that when you go through a loss, you have to mourn. You have to mourn. You can't choose not to mourn because you believe it's good. You can't say, I'm not going to experience the loss of a loved one as suffering because it's actually a great blessing. No, you're not allowed to do that. That's considered cruel. You mourn for a loss. The blessing that you say when somebody passes away is that God is the true judge. You can't say the blessing that you would say when a baby is born, that God is good and does good. You can't say that blessing on a loss. You have to experience a loss as a loss. There is a human emotional reaction to pain and suffering that has to be. He's not saying to replace that with this theology of ultimate goodness coming down in secrecy and hiddenness. What Rabbi Shneur Zalman is saying is that coupled with the pain that you feel, there's a faith position that ultimately I'm close to God at this moment. it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel easy. I'm feeling pain, but there is a closeness to God in the concealment of Him, in that darkness, in the negative experience. And I think it's very hard to bring it down into words, but somebody who's experienced it knows it, that there is a closeness to God when you're going through pain and suffering. But you have to catch yourself from falling into the numbness of heart, which is distance from God. You have to have this has to be prepared in advance, this perspective. It can't be in the midst of pain and suffering that you start to read this. It's not going to talk to you. But if this sinks in when things are okay, then when we go through those difficult times, we've got a response, we've got an attitude, we've got something to hold on to. I'm not feeling it, I'm feeling pain. But I know there's something bigger there. There's something greater there. And that will get us through it, not just get us through it, but it'll actually lift us in that moment of difficulty. To try and just illustrate this a little bit more concrete, the curse of the snake. In the book of Genesis, we know that the snake was the one that encouraged Eve to eat from the forbidden fruit, and Eve then got Adam to eat from it as well. So the snake, obviously this snake was a talking, standing serpent. It wasn't like the snakes we have now. It stood on 2 feet. It could speak to Adam and Eve. It was the wisest of all creatures. And it got Adam and Eve to do the sin. Without going into the details and the depth of the story, but we know that afterwards God punished Adam and Eve and the snake for their involvement in the sin. What was the snake's punishment? Among other things, it was punished to eat dust all the days of your life. You'll eat the dust. Its legs were taken away, you'll sliver on the ground, and you're going to eat dust all the days of your life. Which indeed, by the way, snakes do actually eat dust. Their tongue picks up dust as they crawl around, takes it up to a certain organ inside their mouth to taste, and that's how they sense where they are, and they actually do swallow the dust. So the sages asked the interesting question: what type of punishment is that? What type of punishment is it that you eat the dust? That is actually a blessing. Dust is everywhere. Dust is anywhere you need dust, you can get it. So what's so bad about being told you're going to eat the dust? Imagine we could eat dust. We'd be fine. We'd be happy. We have it everywhere. So what does it mean that the snake has been cursed to eat the dust? So our sages explain that the curse here is that God is telling the snake, I don't want to have anything to do with you. When somebody doesn't have their food, they turn to God to ask for food. But when food is there, when you've got it, you don't need to turn to God. So God says, I'm so upset at you, I'm so angry at you, your food is going to be everywhere, you're not going to need to pray to me, you're not going to need to turn to me ever. You are looked after for the rest of your life, you've got everything you need, I don't want to see you again. It's a rejection, it's a being pushed away from God, having all that you need, having everything that you need. Whereas when you don't always have it, when you're lacking, when something's taken away from you, and you feel that emptiness, and you turn to God, the yearning for God, that is actually a blessing. The fact that we have needs, that we have lack, that we have pain, that we're not always fed, that itself is God inviting us into a relationship. The snake was pushed away from that relationship. But we, who do not have it always easy, who go through difficult times, that is God calling out to us, saying, I want to have a relationship with you, I want to be close to you, unlike the snake. So, this doesn't mean when you're hungry, when you're in pain, that this is fantastic news. It's hard, it's difficult, but it's not a punishment. You're not being punished. Pain and suffering, going through challenging times in our life is not God punishing us. On the contrary, it is God wanting us to be close. Why it has to be that way? Why can't it all be peaceful and happy? We don't understand. We don't know. We're not justifying pain, but we're giving an understanding of an approach to it, that it is God wanting to be close to us, not the opposite, not in pushing us away. And that will change our whole perspective on it. So from here we see there's no place for sadness due to material hardship. When you're hungry, when you're going through pain and suffering, you lost your job or you lost a loved one. So that should you should react to it, you should mourn for it, but the sadness, meaning the blockage of the heart, the stone, that should not be because God is bringing you closer, is not pushing you away. But what about my own spiritual failings? What about the lack that I know I have within myself? Should that not lead me to sadness? Shouldn't I become depressed about that? How can I not be upset about my moral failings, my mistakes, the wrong that I have done? Things that happen to me that I don't have control over, okay, that's God shedding light on me, fine. But my mistakes, the wrong that I've done, the harm that I've caused, surely that is a reason to feel down. How am I not going to feel down about that? So in this, Rabbi Zalman says the following: as for sadness which is connected with spiritual matters, one must seek ways of freeing oneself from it. Certainly during prayer, when one must serve God with gladness and a joyful heart. But even if you become melancholy or anxious about heavenly matters while at work, it is clearly a machination of the evil impulse to lure you afterwards into lusts, God forbid, as is known. For were it not so, whence would a genuine sadness, which is one that is derived from love or fear of God, come to you in the midst of your business affairs? He was saying that you're thinking about your own moral failings. So the question is, when are you thinking about this? When are you contemplating your lowliness, how bad you are, how wrong you are? If it's in the middle of your prayers or studying Torah, at that time you have to do it with joy. So to start thinking about how lowly you are when you start praying, that's not the time. It's not appropriate because now you have to do it with joy. And the fact that you're starting to think about how lowly you are during prayer, that's your evil inclination. That's your animal soul trying to drag you away that you shouldn't pray. That's all it is, trying to stop you pray. And so in the midst of doing something good, in the midst of your spiritual activities, in the midst of your studies and your meditations and your prayers, if you then start thinking, well, who am I to pray to God when I've done all these wrong things? That's not a holy thought. That's an unholy thought. That's your animal soul trying to stop you from praying, stop you from studying Torah or meditating. So dismiss it. It's not the time. But what if the thought about your loneliness comes to you in the middle of work? You're sitting there just going about your normal business, cooking dinner or at the computer, and suddenly you think about what a rotten person you are and how all the failings that you've had. Again, that is your evil inclination coming now. Why all of a sudden now are you thinking about this? Why is this popping into your head? It's the evil inclination that wants to lead you, to lure you into lusts, to indulging. It's a weird thing. But as soon as we feel low about ourselves, as soon as we beat up on ourselves a little bit, we then indulge. We then go to make ourselves feel better by indulging in some physical pursuit. So we go shopping, or we eat a lot of chocolate, or we do something that will make us feel better in a very superficial way because we feel so bad about ourselves. That is really why suddenly we're thinking these moral, lofty thoughts of how I'm a lowly person, I should be better. Why is it coming to you now in the middle of your work? Why is it popping into your head now? In other words, Rabbi Zalman here is saying, okay, you have moral failings, you've done things wrong, we need to deal with that, that's true. But when? When is the time that you should feel bad about the wrong that you have done? Certainly not in the midst of prayer, because you have to concentrate on your prayer and be joyous and do it with joy, not with sadness. So when you're in your spiritual mode, you're doing something spiritual, now's not the time to feel lowly about yourself, because that will ruin it. On the other hand, if this thought comes to you when you're at work, what's it relevant? Why is it coming now? Why are you making a moral reckoning of yourself in the midst of your daily activities? That is your animal soul just trying to distract you, to make you feel down about yourself. Because when you feel down about yourself, you try to make yourself feel better by indulging in some physical pursuit, and that's just animalistic. It's your animal soul just dragging you down. So when you're in the midst of your spiritual pursuits, not the time. When you're in the midst of your mundane material pursuits, work or daily activities, it's also not the time. So when is the time? So, whether the melancholy encroaches on you during study or prayer, or during other activities, you should tell yourself that now is not the time for genuine anxiety, not even for worry over serious transgressions, God forbid. You may have done some terrible things. Now's not the time to think about it. For this, one needs appointed times and an appropriate occasion with calmness of mind to reflect on the greatness of God against whom one has sinned, so that one's heart may truly be broken with sincere contrition. Meaning, yes, you do need to schedule a time to be sad about the wrong that you've done, but not at the animal soul's behest. You have to decide when that is, and it has to be an appropriate time. And at that time, what should you be thinking about? Not how lowly I am, how great God is. God who created me, who gave me all these gifts, and then I went and acted immorally? How could I do that? And then you'll feel brokenhearted, an appropriate, good sadness, and a brokenheartedness that I'm disappointed in myself and I need to fix myself and I need to improve. You're not going to just feel down about yourself and then go and eat a bar of chocolate. You're going to say, I feel down about myself. I need to do something about this. I need to work on myself. But that's only going to happen if this sadness comes deliberately at an appropriate time and you then move on from it. Look what he says next. It is explained elsewhere in another section of Tanya when this time should be. And he suggests that some people, before going to bed, have a moment of contrition. Some people every Thursday night do it. It should be done just before Yom Kippur. That's a good time to do it. There are certain set-aside times, and you can decide how often it should be, but it shouldn't be, certainly not more than once a day, and probably not more than once a week. There's a certain time when you should feel regret about your moral failings and a desire to fix it. And it is there explained in this other place in Tanya also that as soon as your heart has been broken during those specific occasions, you should then completely remove the sorrow from your heart and believe with perfect faith that God has removed your sin in His abundant forgiveness. This is the true joy in God which comes after the remorse. In other words, if you want to know if you're being sincere about this, so once you've realized the wrong that you've done, the lowliness that you have reached and the disappointment you have in your own moral self, you've set aside a time for that, you feel it, you feel brokenhearted, disappointed in yourself, and then you ask God for forgiveness. And if you have faith in God, then you have to believe that God forgives. And once you have asked for forgiveness, He has forgiven you. Now move on. Now be joyous in the renewed relationship you have with Him, in the cleansed soul that you have, that the negativity has gone away. If you don't, if you remain disappointed and feel bad about yourself and continue beating yourself up, what does that show? You don't believe in God. You don't really believe in God. You think that God's big, but not that big. Not so big He can forgive me. That's not faith. If you believe in God, you believe that God can forgive you too. And if you've asked for forgiveness, He's forgiven you. If you've had a broken heart, you feel real contrition, you feel real regret for what you've done, that's all God asked for. And He's forgiven you. It's finished. And then you can have joy after that. This can lead to joy. That's a great sadness, because that sadness actually leads to a very upbeat, joyous self. But you have to have faith. You have to really believe that He forgives. Now, of course, we're talking here about wrongdoings between you and God. We're not talking about if you've hurt another person, then you do have to apologize to that person. And there are parameters and limitations to that as well, each according to the situation. But here we're talking about where you feel that you're not a good enough person. That's between you and God. Not that you've hurt another person, but that you have not lived up to what you expect of yourself, what God expects of you. God forgives you for that, for those wrongdoings. If you've asked forgiveness from a person and they've forgiven you, God forgives you too. You just have to ask for it. But you have to believe that that is true. But this can only happen at the preordained times, the scheduled times for being sad about your moral state. It cannot come to you just impulsively, in the midst of your prayers, in the midst of your work, or just while you're walking down the street. Because that is the animal soul trying to make you feel miserable about yourself and drag you into depression. It has to be a set-aside time when you feel the brokenheartedness, you say sorry, and you're forgiven, and then you feel joy. This is knowing when to be sad and having control of it. When the thoughts start to come to bring you down, you say, good point, I do need to deal with this, but now's not the time. And you schedule the time to do it. And in scheduling the time, you have to have a time limit as well. I'm going to feel sad about my moral state for 20 minutes. And then I'm going to be forgiven because I'm going to ask for forgiveness. Once I feel that brokenheartedness, I have to be able to move on. Rabbi Shneur Zalman here has given a whole deeper perspective of faith. We think of faith as being, we believe in God. Okay, let's test that faith. Let's see how personal that faith is. Do you believe that God is so powerful that He can even forgive you after you've asked for forgiveness, which is what He said you need to do? If you have faith, so then you can believe that you can be forgiven, that even you can be forgiven. That's what faith is. So, in conclusion, there are three main points that this chapter, big points that this chapter has presented to us. The first one is that joy is a duty an obligation, it's a commandment, it's a mitzvah, because you can't fight your inner evil when sluggish and heavy. If you're sluggish and heavy and depressed and low, so then you're an easy target for your animal soul and you're going to be walked all over. You need to be joyous. It's an obligation to be joyous, because then you'll be victorious in your battle against your inner evil. Second of all, the vicissitudes of life are actually divine love that we can't perceive. If closeness to God is what you seek, then He is hidden. When He is hidden, He's closer. So joy is not precluded by the fact that you go through difficulties. The difficulties make you feel, you can feel pain, that's fine. But to feel down about the pain, to feel down about you, that you've been pushed away, no. The difficulties in life are God calling you to be close to Him. And so therefore, they should not lead to a numbness of heart. And finally, don't beat yourself up over moral failings. Set aside a time to feel remorse, and then have faith that God forgives. That once you've asked forgiveness, you've been forgiven. And these ideas, they're not simple ideas. They're not easy to digest. But when we work on them repeatedly, it becomes a part of the furniture of our mind, the reaction, our impulsive reaction to our reality. So then those things that prevent the heart from feeling are blocked, that we don't let them in. And therefore our heart doesn't get blocked. Our heart is free to feel the natural joy that is its natural state. We will conclude there. God willing, next week, we're going to look at did you ever have a day free of ugly thoughts and base desires? Did you ever go through a day where you didn't have any negative thoughts or anything ugly go through your mind? Can you keep your mind pure for even 1 hour? Can you spend 1 hour of only thinking good and not thinking any bad thoughts about another person or about yourself? If the answer is no, which for me it is, then what does this say about us? We're going to find out next week. It's not such bad news. God willing, that will be next week. If there are any questions, we can take questions.
Just Rabbi, just to say, in the Shema, the nighttime Shema, every single night, that's what you ask is for forgiveness.
Correct. The nighttime Shema, and that's why the nighttime before bed is the appropriate time for this, is we ask for forgiveness, that if we have hurt anybody, we ask that forgiveness, and we give forgiveness to anyone who has hurt us. That we don't want to go to bed holding onto something.
I think that's very powerful.
Yeah. That's right. It is a very powerful thing, and the fact that we do it daily. We did it last night. We've got to do it again tonight, because we do things wrong. And here, I think what Rabbi Shneur Zalman has added to this is, and then believe that you've been forgiven. Like, you have to actually let it go, because you asked for forgiveness, so it has happened.
But you need to be joyous in that, in the Shema.
Correct.
You're not contemplating your own melancholy or...
Correct. And a part of the Shema is that God is one. The idea of God is one is that all that happens is from the same God. The good and what doesn't seem to be good to us is also from the one God. And so that should be with joy. And then the moment where we feel remorse and like a negative feeling, a sadness, that's okay to feel that, to have the brokenheartedness, to ask for forgiveness, and then move on. To be able to move on from it.
And you speak about asking for forgiveness and a breakdown in our moral values and acts. But what about, I assume you're also talking about anxieties or pain over loss, that would all be in that same sort of time that you set aside to consider your own issues. Well,
I think it's a separate thing, and that's the reason why Rabbi Shneur Zalman in this chapter divided them into two sections. The first section was talking about anxieties or pain over things that have happened to us or things that are going on around us. Not our moral failings, but just the life issues that happen to every single person. So you need to have I guess, like I said, the Shema, the meditation of the Shema is that there's one God and everything's coming from Him. And we need time to contemplate on the fact that it's all coming from Him. So when those anxieties start to come, when we start to feel sad or upset or worried or anxious about something that's happened to us or happening to us, it's then that we have to stop, slow down the emotion, and say that what's happening to me now is a divine concealment. That it is God hiding in this, And God hiding is even higher than revelation. So I may need to experience pain at the moment, but I shouldn't experience bitterness as a result of that pain, or rejection as a result of that pain. So it's a meditation that I think that happens as the feeling arises.
So that can happen intermittently through the day.
You don't need to set aside a time to think about your anxieties. I don't think that he didn't suggest. It's about your moral failings. You need to set aside a time. The other things, it's when it arises, you have to counter it with the faith position.
Okay, I understand.
But certainly, if it arises in the midst of your prayer, now's not the time. I'll deal with it after. Like in prayer, you have to be focusing. Okay. Thank you. God willing, we'll continue next week.